And welcome to the Legal Power Hour, where we jam 60 minutes of thought-provoking discussion into a 30-minute show designed to inform, awaken, and protect our fellow American citizens. Host Tom Scott and Sarah Nahidi. And today we are pleased to have with us our guest, champion of small government and co-author of Time for a Turning Point, Hamacheck. Well, welcome to our show, Brent.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining us.
I'm thrilled to be asked to join a show where you primarily focus on legal topics. I've done a lot of different interviews, and this is a nice forum, a different kind of forum to be able to participate. So the ideas, the things that we write about and talk about are relevant. It's just sort of a different turn of the hologram. So I'm looking forward to it.
Great, great. And if you would, we like to do this with our guests all the time. Could you tell our viewers background in business and perhaps in your book and what led you to where you are today, doing what you're doing?
Sure. I've had a very circuitous route in my life. I grew up in northern Michigan in Sault Ste. Marie, so I'm a Youper, as we're commonly referred to. And if I go back to when I was a senior in high school, I read a book that got me very interested in economics. So I decided that I was going to focus on my studies my senior year, go to college, study economics, and then go change the world. So I did focus on my studies, and I did go to college and study economics. But then I got out and got married and got a job and didn't really change anything. And my career started in the banking industry. A number of years later, I opened my own consulting practice, which I did 17 years ago. And that's gone quite well. I mean, I work with privately owned companies. I help them do everything from startup to turn around and do all the things in between, along with the team of folks I work with in the Chicago suburbs. But the passion I had for free markets and economics never really went away. And several years ago, I was introduced to this extraordinary young guy who 5 years ago, actually next month, used his high school graduation money to start an organization called Turning Point USA. Kid's name was Charlie Kirk. And Charlie and I were introduced by a mutual acquaintance. We were at a part of a dinner gathering, and the kid and I had a little chemistry in terms of how we saw the world, how we thought about things. As I've come to tell people, we don't just look at issues and agree on them. We actually process data and think about them the same way, which is remarkable because there's 31 and a half years worth of age difference between us. What started then was a collaboration between us where I started to write material for Turning Point, the publications that they use on college campuses. They're all about free markets and first principles. And those shorter books that I wrote turned out to be an audition. It wasn't really planned that way, but a year or so ago, Charlie's donor said, it's time for you to write a full-length book. And he asked me if I would write it with him. And so we started on that project and published it last October. And the one thing I will say about the book and what was so rewarding to have a chance to work on it is that while the book is written in Charlie's voice, and he is the one who's become a national leader in the youth movement for free markets, because he and I see the world the same way, because we agree on issues and process data virtually identically, the words we put on paper weren't just his, they were also mine. And so imagine that all these years later, this kid from northern Michigan who thought that maybe he'd go to school and study and try to change the world, actually in his early 50s wound up with a chance to contribute to doing exactly that. So Charlie gave me the opportunity of a lifetime. We like to joke that it was like Northbrook's Got Talent, and he discovered me. So he gave me my ticket to Hollywood. And we've had a lot of fun with it. It's been very rewarding.
Brent, if you could you talk about the important message of your book?
Sure. So the idea is that for young people in particular today, they're being brought through an educational system that has placed first principles and free markets, capitalism, in disfavor. These are things that are no longer thought of as being fashionable. They're archaic, they're cold. And what we wanted to do, what Charlie wanted to do, was articulate a vision for the future of America. And we do that early in the book. We create this future, in our mind, a utopia of what America could look like down the road if it embraced first principles and free markets again. And we do this by living the life of a fictional character named Julio. And we take Julio through his life. And in every aspect of his life, from age 5 to age 75, we see how he and the people around him have been impacted positively because they live in a free society. And so once we show that, we basically say to the reader, if you'd like this, keep reading and we'll show you how to get there. And the rest of the book is a very positive roadmap on how to try to return America to being the way our founding fathers envisioned it. And so as opposed to being a book, I'll put it this way, when we started on the project, one of the things that Charlie said was, I don't want this book to be a typical bitch session about all the things that are wrong with America. I want it to be focused on good things that can be and showing people how to get there. So that's the book we wrote. We wrote it with an emphasis towards millennials and youth because that's who Turning Point USA reaches. But I will tell you, I've had so many adults and so many folks who are white-haired adults read the book and tell me very good things about what they got from it. And along that line, last thought on it, it's been very interesting to me that every person I talk to who's read the book has some part of it that was their favorite, and there's no theme to it. Everybody has a different chapter or section that really got to them. And to me, that's some measure of success. I mean, if everybody said I liked the last chapter, you would figure the first 12 were terrible. But everybody seems to have something that they particularly enjoy, and it's all different. So I think it's a pretty good read.
So the book is basically not a remedial book, but one that kind of will lead people of today into the future, and it does address, I guess, the problem of big government, right?
It does. You know, Turning Point's slogan that the organization is known for is "Big Government Sucks." And that resonates with people, with young people. It's something that's sticky. And to give you an idea of the kind of ground we cover in this book, we talk about the history of political movements in the United States and how Turning Point fits into that picture. We talk about the history of the right-wing and left-wing terminology that we use today and show how America has actually gotten this divided over the last 200 years. We talk about marketing and messaging to young people, and we apply a lot of the principles that Malcolm Gladwell wrote about in The Tipping Point close to 20 years ago. So the book itself, and we make specific policy suggestions in every chapter where we raise an issue or a problem, we make specific proposals about how to correct it. And then one of the very key things, it's a big issue for Turning Point, a big issue for Charlie, is what we call the game of loans. A bit of parody after the Game of Thrones series that everybody loves. But it talks about this evil sort of cabal that exists between government, finance, and educational institutions to basically pull young people into an educational system that's overpriced, leaves them deeply in debt, possessing degrees they can't use in the marketplace effectively. And we expose that for what it is, and we propose some solutions for how to address that issue. So the book covers a lot of ground, and we feel it covers it in a very serious intellectual way. And there's some fun lines in it as well.
So, I mean, the slogan of Turning Point is "Big Government Sucks."
Yeah, and I wouldn't say, if I said it was purely their slogan, that wouldn't, I'm going to say that in quotation marks. It is the phrase that's become the linchpin of the organization and that people think of oftentimes when they hear about the organization because it has been so sticky. In the presidential election, by the way, in 2016, during some of the debates and on the campaign trail, different candidates would use that very phrase. So it really has built some traction in the marketplace. And I guess it's become like a de facto slogan, if you will.
So Tom and I both agree about, big government is a huge problem and contributor to some of the problems with the legal system. If you could, Brent, could you tell us a little bit about your thoughts about what's going on currently with the U.S. legal system and how that interrelates with our ginormous government?
Sure. It's almost the kind of question that I'm afraid to answer because perhaps there will be, nefarious repercussions. Somebody will be knocking on my front door later tonight. But I will tell you that I believe there's a way in which you can make the argument, and I think I probably would make the argument, that the American legal system, at least by one measure, is perhaps the worst one on earth. Now, people who listen to that will think I'm some sort of a radical loon for saying something because we're a free country and we still have all of these principles of fairness and other things. But I say it because if you measure the distance between the promise of what it was supposed to be in the 1700s and the reality of what it's become today, that distance is terribly great. The distance between the promise and the deliverable, say in Saudi Arabia, isn't great at all. They're right there where they say they're going to be. But we've promised to give people the fairest system in the world, and I think we're falling far short, whether it's on the criminal side or whether it's on the civil side. And I deal in the business law side of the world every single day. So I live in it knee deep. And it's not good, and it's very disappointing to see the distance between the promise and the deliverable in 2017.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Like, if there was one thing, say, that you could change in the United States as it is right now, and you said there were a lot of problems, what would that one thing be if you could change one thing or improve it?
Well, I've thought about that. That's a great question, right? Because there's a tendency when you're asked that question to focus on some particular issue or maybe on some particular systematic something. Somebody might say, for example, we need to balance the budget, or we need to fix this healthcare mess, or we need to strengthen our military. But what I think, if I could change one thing, I would change the mind of the American citizens so that magically when they all woke up tomorrow morning, they would have the ability suddenly to set emotion aside and replace it with reason. Because we've lost all sense of reason in our debates, in our conversations. We're no longer applying thoughtfulness. It's like the executive function side of the American brain is shut down. This isn't about people just having reasonable disagreements. This is about people shouting and screaming at each other so passionately without any knowledge of what they're talking about that it is impossible for us to solve any problem. So to the extent that I might be able to insert a chip in a big government way into everybody's head tonight as they go to sleep and have that chip kick in the process of reason tomorrow and replace emotion, then we could solve all of those different problems that people might like to narrowly point to when they say, I'd like to fix one thing. Perhaps then we could fix everything. But I don't know how to do that.
Brent, that's such an interesting point because that's the first thing I tell my clients whenever we're going into litigation or I'm working on solving a problem for a client. I say, you got to take the emotion out of the equation. And you have to remove any kind of emotional context and let's stick to the facts. Let's stick to the evidence. Let's stick to the facts. But because when emotion gets thrown into a situation, there's no logic. There's no logic. And I agree with you that that's a big issue as to why our society is where it is right now.
There's a lecture I give that's business oriented in nature. And it's, choosing reason over emotion. And, one of the things doing what I do for a living, where I work with privately owned companies for the last 17 years, I'll make an argument that's counterintuitive. I would say, for example, that one of the most destructive emotions that business people can experience is optimism. I've seen optimism cause more damage to more families and companies than probably any other emotion, because people will blindly step into a situation where circumstances and reason dictate that this just isn't going to work. And they'll say, you know what? We're going to make it happen. I believe in it. This is going to work out. It's going to be okay. Well, that sounds good. I mean, and if you're Knute Rockne or you're Vince Lombardi, it's probably great to tell your team that at halftime. But from a business perspective, skipping the idea of logically and methodically working through a situation and figuring out what to do and just saying, it's going to be great, is very, very dangerous. So even the positive emotions can be destructive from a decision-making perspective.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Brent. And my own personal view is one of the things, I kind of getting back to the question I asked before about changing the country. I think, getting people off the couch to do anything is kind of falls in line with your logic versus emotion. People have the emotion to go on Facebook and complain, or other social media outlets and complain, but getting them to actually fix a problem or getting them to do something, I find that's one of our flaws as American citizens, is that people actually they don't do anything. They love to complain, but getting them in motion is kind of one of those problems,
That's right. And if you're going to get involved, one of the things I always think that's interesting is people make the get involved argument, and that's good and that's right. But there should be a comma, not a period after that. Get involved, but get involved in a way that actually utilizes something that you're good at. And I'll give you, a real life example. A few years ago, during the election campaign, I was approached by a young youth group to go door to door to last minute to try to garner votes for a candidate. And I said, look, I'm in my 50s. I'm the creepy old guy knocking on people's door. I don't think people want to see me knocking on their door the day before the election. I'm probably going to scare away more voters than I am attract them. And it's just not my thing. So I said, you know what? I'm not willing to do that. But what have I done? So, my gift in the public square, my gift is language and words, and the way to maybe take a thought that someone might have in their head and they just can't articulate it. They don't know how to say it. And maybe I know how to say those things. I have a gift of language. So I've made a real contribution, thanks to the opportunity that Charlie Kirk and Turning Point gave to me, to contribute to the debate in the public square. That was my talent. That was my gift. So if you're going to get involved, why not get involved in a way that, what's the old song, accentuate the positive. So do something that takes your skills and talents and brings those to the game. Don't just be a creepy old guy knocking on a door. So do something that you can really contribute with.
I totally agree with you, Brent. Obviously, you felt really passionately to be a part of this project and to write a book. I know you've talked a little bit about, who you're partners with and how it came about, but was there one thing in particular that motivated you to write this book?
So the ideas in the book, the ideas of capitalism and free markets being the only fair way for a society to live. In other words, if you care about social justice, you should care about free markets. The idea of showing the power of freedom to produce versus the ineptitude of a planned economy to produce. These kinds of ideas are ideas that I've been living with and working on since I was 17 years old. And so when I was given an opportunity to essentially dust myself off and come out of intellectual retirement and to help contribute those ideas, this for me, being involved in writing this book was probably one of the greatest things, other than personal, family type things, greatest thing that has ever happened in my life. Because imagine having a lifetime worth of thought and research and ideas and coffee shop arguments and all those things that people are passionate about, and then being able to transmit them to the world. There they are. So it's all there now for you to see. And so you get to empty your head on paper, and then people can take it for what it's worth, but at least you've had the chance to do it. And not everybody gets that chance. And some people get the chance and they walk away from the chance, right? We're afraid of success, or we think, well, gosh, I won't be any good at it. Kind of been like that a lot of times in my life. I've walked away from opportunities, but this one I didn't walk away from, and it was a chance of a lifetime. So now the things that Charlie believes are the same things that I believe. So when this book goes out under his name and my name, it's our work, it's our conversations, it's what we feel is important for America, and there it all is. So for anybody who cares enough to look, you can see it. That's a great thing to be able to do.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And you've talked a lot about, free markets now. That's so important. And Tom and I completely agree with that. How and where do you see the legal system falling into? Where does the legal system fit in a free market society?
Well, so that question could take a whole other half hour. Let me try to do justice to it. I have always felt for a long time that there are two legal creations of free men that are absolutely works of art. One are the rules of the road for traffic, and the other one is the Uniform Commercial Code. And the reason I say that the Uniform Commercial Code and the rules of the road are so beautiful is that if you really think about it, think about this the next time you're driving somewhere. Everything that you're required to do in your automobile is actually intuitive. If somebody just said to you, hey, we're going to make a rule about lines on the road and things, make one up really quick. If you were brilliant, you'd make up the ones we have. The system is so good, it works. The Uniform Commercial Code is exactly the same way. When you think about contracts and rules of engagement, everything that seems intuitively fair is there in the Uniform Commercial Code. So we did a great job of structuring a framework. Now what's happening today, what people don't know about, is that the Uniform Commercial Code is being tinkered with from the bench by judicial fiat, by rulings that say, well, perhaps this isn't what the code says, but maybe it's what it should have said if the people that wrote it were as smart as I am. And so we'll have court decisions that are starting to usurp the principles of contract law. And once that happens, all of the cohesiveness of business starts to disintegrate. Because if the deal you make today, you can't rely on tomorrow, then you may not make that deal today. So it actually is like some strange form of time travel. The perception of it being gone in the future stops it from existing in the present. And I think that the legal system, it's kind of like what we're doing now with the legal system is a little bit like when my daughter, who's 15 now, she would make a picture when she was little. And she'd draw, maybe have a tree and a sun and a house and a smiling person. And you'd look and you say, wow, it's a really great picture. That's really beautiful. And then you'd walk out of the room, and 15 minutes later you'd come back, and there was a cat and a squirrel and a car and an eyeball and all sorts of other things. And you thought, you know what? The picture was pretty good before. You shouldn't have kept adding to it. And that's what we're doing in the legal system today. We're adding too much. It was pretty good when it was simpler. It was the rules of the road. But as it gets more complex, the ability to conduct commerce becomes more complicated, but worse than that, it becomes uncertain. And when it becomes uncertain, it stalls, and that's not good for any of us.
Yeah, we actually, that's a very good point. And we say, there's over 1 million laws in the United States, probably closer to 2 million, and the list is growing every day. And, you know, when you have too much, you know, less is more, really. When you have too much, that's one of the contributors for corruption, because it gives room for too much interpretation, right? You get, I'm going to apply this law now, I'm going to apply that law later. You know, the prosecutors, the defense, the judge, they have too much to choose from, and it opens up the whole can of. So yeah, there's certainly way too much bloatware or laws or whatever you want to call it in our system today. That's a fact.
You know, bad law breeds contempt for good law. And I'm a disciple of Bastiat and his work on the law that goes back a long, long time ago. And the argument being made that if a law isn't just, then what it does is it starts to corrupt and negate the belief in the entire legal system. And it makes even the just laws essentially become or feel unjust. So you get this sense of sort of lawlessness where people say, if everything matters, then nothing matters, right? So it's kind of perverse. And, you know, I think the beautiful thing about the work that you folks have done is, you know, everybody talks about preppers, you know, and building your bunker inside of the side of the mountain in Utah or whatever it might be, and waiting for a nuclear attack. You've given people the opportunity to be preppers for an unexpected entrance into the legal world. And I think that's absolutely what a great concept. And nobody's really done that before. So hats off for stepping into that green space. Necessary.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
One other thing I'd like to say about the legal system that's sort of a passion of mine. I think that when people refer to the criminal justice system, that might be the greatest oxymoron that has ever been utilized. This idea that our system is about justice is so fallacious and almost ish to believe in that. I don't know what to say except to say that our system, you know, the TV show Law and Order was the greatest named television show ever, because that's what our system's about. It's just about preserving order, but it's not about justice. I don't think there's a whole lot of justice that's done in the criminal system today. So that's a disappointment to me.
Well, we definitely agree with you 100% on that issue. And I mean, we like to call it the criminal injustice system, because especially in the criminal system, it's just, it's full of corruption, and unfortunately, justice is not served. I mean, the majority of criminal cases are decided by, you know, prosecutor and a criminal defense attorney cutting deals. So, I mean, we've eroded our constitutional rights and got rid of jury trials and a lot of other things that, you know, don't do anyone justice, quote unquote.
Yeah, I always am at odds with my conservative friends. You know, by the way, if people read our book, the chapter in the book that I like the most is the last one, which talks about ending the game between team right and team left. And it talks about the history and how we got to this whole right wing, left wing thing and all the bad terminology. So if you read the book, you'll understand that people associate me with being on team right, to use my terms, but I'm really not on a team. And one of the things that people on team right don't like are criminal defense attorneys. I love criminal defense attorneys. I think criminal defense attorneys are almost the last great hope for America, because while they get all the stories written because we pick out the case where some criminal went free because of a clever attorney, I live in a state, Illinois, where I believe it was 23 people that we had on death row that the system had processed. These people were innocent. They were proven innocent. And the system fought the people who were attempting to prove their innocence every step of the way until the DNA evidence made it incontrovertible that they were innocent. So criminal defense attorneys are so important in the job they do. They are that last wall between a system that wants to churn out wins and convictions versus preserving our individual liberty. So I'm in the minority. I get beat up by my friends all the time. I love criminal defense attorneys.
So that's another interesting point is, like, in the front matter of our book, Sarah and I discuss how we were very much pro-death penalty before we got into the legal system. Now we're very much anti-death penalty. And in the same reason, I was very much anti-defense attorney. Now I'm very much pro-defense attorney. They're probably the only ones that deserve any respect in the legal system. You just nailed it. I don't think I can add to that.
Look, if you talk to a typical, what I'll call a conservative, you'll say, tell me, what do you think of the government and the United States Postal Service? And they'll say, oh, they're terrible. They shouldn't have a monopoly on the mail. Anybody should be able to deliver mail. The government has no business being there. They can't get it delivered on time, goes to the wrong address. And then you say, what do you think about the death penalty? They say, I believe in the death penalty. I believe in capital punishment. And you say, let me get this straight. You think that the government can't deliver the mail, but you trust them to kill the right person. That's interesting. It is so disconnected from the notions of valuing individual liberty and freedom, but the typical person doesn't get there. But I don't think you can say, I don't believe in the efficacy of government, but I think it ought to be able to execute folks. Because I'm really convinced they're not going to kill the right people. And I say that without any apology. I just fear the knock on my door later.
Strong argument. And I don't be in their right mind could argue with that point you just made, with the government. And we write about this in the book as well. And there's no competition in the government. That's probably 50% of the problem. There's many problems with our system. The prosecutorial immunity, the judicial immunity, too many laws. But probably number one is the no competition. And you can't rely on the government to or even convict, never mind the execution. We got at least 50,000, probably closer to 200,000 to 300,000 innocent people in jail right now. It's alarming. It's truly alarming. And
yeah, I agree. I think it's unfortunate. It's these inconsistencies. Going back to the notion of reason over emotion, we'll have the same kind of folks who perhaps say the government can't deliver the mail, but we ought to execute criminals. They'll talk about, well, with big government and all these left-wing people, we're going to wind up having a police state. And you say, well, that's true. And then you say, what about the way the police sometimes behave with people? You say, well, no, the cops are great. Police are wonderful. We love the police. And you say, well, wait a minute. Weren't you just afraid of a police state? If you love shouldn't we have one of those? But so the inconsistencies are all over the place because people aren't thinking about what they're saying, and they're sort of supporting teams and positions, and they're not using their logic and their reason. And of course, social media, which is really anti-social media, has made all of this worse. It has taken road rage and digitized it, and the level of discourse has dropped. I'm not on social media. I'm not a social media person. I can tell you that before our book came out, I went on Twitter for 45 days prior to the release of the book, not as myself, but as the book. So the book had a Twitter handle, and I would put out some positive message each day, trying to generate a little bit of anticipation for the book to be released. Well, to be on Twitter means to view Twitter. I didn't even realize you could pack so much vulgarity into 140 characters, especially where spaces count. I'm no prude, and I used to work on a boat when I was in college, so I've been with sailors. I couldn't believe the stuff I was seeing. And it didn't matter which team was putting it out. It was just drivel, and it was endless. It was just endless. So we're drowning in profanity. We're drowning in insults. In an emotion and a lack of civility and reason.
Absolutely. We are just about out of time. Sarah, is there anything you would like to ask Brent before we close?
Brent, can you tell our viewers how they can view a copy of your book and order it?
Sure. It's Time for a Turning Point. It's available at Amazon.com for purchase. You folks have been kind enough to feature it on your website as well. Really appreciate that. But Time for a Turning Point, Charlie Kirk with Brent Hamacheck, available on Amazon. Copies in stock. I checked today before we did the show. And I think that if you have a young person in your life, you got a son or daughter in high school or college, and you'd like them to see a vision for America that they could strive for, it's a great book to buy and give to them and say, hey, read this. It gives them something to not just believe in, but something to do. And if you don't have any kids and you're 68 years old, maybe you want to read it because maybe you can see a vision of how there might be some hope, and that if young people are starting to act and view things differently, maybe the legacy for your children and grandchildren will be different. So I think there's something there for everybody. That's been my experience with the people who have read it, and would love anybody to take a look. And you have to take a look at Turning Point USA and Charlie Kirk and what they're doing on college and high school campuses around the country. It's the largest student movement in the United States that embraces first principles and free markets, and it's worth taking a look at. What Charlie's done is remarkable.
I've definitely seen a lot of buzz about the phrase "big government sucks" and your organization on Twitter. Speaking about Twitter before, so it's pretty cool to see the people talking about it on Twitter and other social media platforms.
And if you buy the book, you will read the story of how it all came to be in the first place, the campaign that was built around, how the idea happened. So that's in the book in the early chapters where we give the history of the organization. We also talk about it from a marketing perspective later in the book, and how these phrases and things are used to get people's attention, get them to engage in a way that's compelling to them, and then stick around and join the movement for freedom.
This has been an exceptional discussion, Brent. We would love to have you back again. Super informative. We thank our visitors for watching, of course, and we'd like to let them know, catch our show fresh every first Monday of the month at 10 p.m. Eastern here on our YouTube channel, or do it anytime thereafter. Be sure to subscribe to our blog, monthly post at www.stloiyf.com/blog. Yourself to the fullest extent possible against our wildly corrupt legal system. Be sure to pick up a copy of our book, Stack the Legal Odds in Your Favor. And once again, we also recommend Brent and Charlie's book, which can be, you can look at it on our website. There's a link to it, or of course, as he just mentioned, on Amazon. So once again, Brent, thank you so much for being on our show. It's been fabulous. Thank you for being on our show.
Oh, it was a ball. Thanks for having me. And thanks to my friend Dave Shostokis, who's also an author. His books are on Amazon. He's the one who introduced me to you folks. So I'm grateful to David for doing that.
Thank you.
That's right. Yeah.
Very informative, and we would love to have you back on our show.
All you have to do is ask. This was a ball.
Cool.
Thank you so much.
Great.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.